You know those moments when life feels completely overwhelming? When the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems impossible to cross. I was right there, sitting on my kitchen floor at 3 a.m., surrounded by sticky notes filled with goals and dreams that felt like they belonged to someone else. My laptop was open to yet another How to Change Your Life article, and my phone kept buzzing with notifications from people who seemed to have it all figured out. That night became my turning point, but not in the way you might expect. It wasn't because I suddenly found motivation or had some dramatic epiphany. Instead, it was the night I finally admitted to myself that I was tired of living in the someday zone. Let me be completely honest with you. My rock bottom wasn't dramatic. There weren't any catastrophic failures or life-shattering moments. It was just the quiet realization that I'd spent the last 5 years telling myself, someday. Someday, I'll start that online business. Someday, I'll get in shape. Someday, I'll write that book I've been thinking about. Meanwhile, I was spending 3 hours every evening scrolling through social media, watching other people live out the life I kept postponing. The worst part? I had become really good at explaining away my inaction. They have better connections. They probably had a head start. They must have more time. They're probably naturally motivated. I had a whole collection of excuses that I'd polished to perfection. But that night, on my kitchen floor, surrounded by all those sticky notes, something shifted. I realized I'd been waiting for some magical burst of transformation, that Hollywood moment where the main character suddenly becomes a completely different person overnight. Real life doesn't work that way, and deep down, we all know it. Let me share something deeply personal that I've never talked about before. The tiny change that transformed everything for me wasn't impressive at all. After that night of overwhelming emotions, I made the smallest commitment possible. I would put on my running shoes every morning. That's it. I didn't promise myself to run a marathon. I didn't even promise to exercise. Just put on the shoes. The first few days, I felt absolutely ridiculous. There I was, fully dressed for work, wearing bright running shoes, making my morning coffee. But something interesting started happening by day 5. When you're wearing running shoes, sitting on the couch scrolling through your phone feels wrong. It creates this subtle tension in your mind. Some mornings, I found myself stepping outside just to get some fresh air. After all, I was already wearing the shoes, right? Those brief moments of fresh air gradually evolved into short walks. The short walks sometimes turned into light jogs, not because I forced myself, but because it felt like the natural next step. Here's where it gets interesting. This tiny habit started affecting decisions I hadn't even planned on changing. When you move your body in the morning, even just for a few minutes, you naturally start wanting to go to bed earlier. When you go to bed earlier, you stop mindlessly snacking at midnight. When you stop late night snacking, you wake up feeling more refreshed. When you feel more refreshed, you make better choices throughout the day. The most profound change wasn't physical, though, it was psychological. Each morning, when I put on those shoes, I was keeping a promise to myself. That single act of integrity, repeated daily, started changing how I viewed myself. I started showing up differently in my relationships. I began taking more initiative at work. I even started managing my finances better. Not because I made some grand plan, but because I was becoming someone who kept their word, especially to themselves. Let me share what I call the ripple theory of change. Imagine dropping a tiny pebble into a still pond. The initial splash is small, almost insignificant, but watch what happens next. The ripples start spreading, growing, reaching further than you'd expect. That's exactly how tiny habits work in your life. I experienced this firsthand with my writing habit. For years, I dreamed of writing consistently, but the pressure of trying to write perfect posts or long articles paralyzed me. So, I scaled it back to the smallest possible commitment, opening a blank document every day. Just opening it. That's all. The first week was almost comical. I'd open the document, stare at it for a few seconds, then close it. But by week 2, something shifted. The blank page started feeling less like an enemy and more like a familiar friend. Sometimes I'd type a single sentence just because I was already there. Some days, that sentence would turn into a paragraph. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. This brings us to what I call identity osmosis. Most people think you need massive changes to become a different person, but it's actually the opposite. You become a different person through tiny, consistent actions that slowly seep into your identity. Think about it like learning a new language. Success rarely comes from trying to memorize hundreds of words in one sitting. It comes from learning one word, using it until it becomes natural, then adding another. It's slow, unsexy progress, but it's permanent. As we wrap up this conversation, and yes, that's exactly what this is, a conversation between friends, I want to leave you with something powerful. Tonight, when you're lying in bed, think about the person you want to become. Not what you want to achieve, but who you want to be. Then find the smallest possible step toward becoming that person. Remember this. The gap between who you are and who you want to be isn't filled with grand gestures. It's filled with tiny moments of choice, of consciously deciding to take one small step in the right direction. Those moments won't look impressive. They won't make for great Instagram stories, but strung together, they create something remarkable, sustainable, lasting change. Your transformation journey is unique to you. It might start with putting on running shoes, or opening a blank document, or simply drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning. The size of the step doesn't matter. What matters is that you take it, and then take it again tomorrow. You know what's funny? As I sit here recording this video, I can still feel the texture of my kitchen floor from that night. Still see those scattered sticky notes with their half-formed dreams. Sometimes I take one out. I kept a few as reminders and marvel at how those same goals that once felt overwhelming now feel like natural parts of my daily life. Not because I conquered them in some dramatic fashion, but because I allowed myself to grow into them slowly, naturally, like a tree reaching toward the sunlight. The other day, I was cleaning out my closet and found those original running shoes, the ones I committed to just putting on every morning. They're pretty worn out now, but looking at them reminded me of something crucial. Transformation isn't about the tools you have or the circumstances you're in. It's about the promises you keep to yourself, no matter how small they seem. These shoes didn't have any magic in them. The magic was in the decision to put them on every day, even when I didn't feel like it, even when it seemed pointless, even when nobody else could see the significance of that simple act. Before you click away from this video, I want you to do something with me. Take your phone out, yes, right now, and set a reminder for tomorrow morning. Not for some grand plan or ambitious goal, but for the smallest possible action that moves you in the direction of who you want to become. Maybe it's opening your journal, drinking a glass of water, or yes, just putting on your running shoes. Make it so small that it feels almost laughable. Because here's the truth I've learned. Those laughably small actions, sustained over time, are actually the foundation of every meaningful change I've ever made in my life. And I have a feeling that a year from now, you'll look back on this moment, the moment you decided to trust in the power of tiny changes, as the beginning of your own remarkable transformation story. I'd love to hear what tiny step you're going to take tomorrow. Share it in the comments below, not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet commitment to yourself. And remember, The smallest actions often lead to the biggest changes. Until next time, keep taking those tiny steps. Your future self is already grateful for the journey you're about to begin.